Welcome to Conversations of Hope with Liberty Forrest. Everyone has a story, and everyone faces challenges and traumatic events. Maybe right now that's your story. Maybe you're just trying to get through one day at a time, or even 1 minute at a time. In this uplifting series, Liberty's guests share some of the most difficult obstacles they've overcome, offering hope and encouragement to those who are in the midst of slaying their own dragons. Enjoy these inspiring stories of triumph over tragedy, of thriving beyond surviving, and bring the new light of hope into your life. And now, here's Liberty.
My guest today is the irrepressible and, dare I say, unstoppable Frank Moffatt. Frank is an international best-selling author, a motivational speaker, a lifestyle coach, artist manager, TV writer, songwriter, music producer, and movie producer. Is there anything you don't do? Frank has spoken in over 15 countries around the world, including the main stage at the 2013 Beijing International Book Fair. In years past, Frank managed his 4 sons, the Moffatts, to international music stardom. He's dined with presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and sultans, has traveled to over 60 countries, managed the world's largest English teacher training company, which is called TEFL International, and coached numerous youth sports teams to regional, provincial, and even national championships. Frank lives by his mantra, live, learn, laugh, love, and lead, and keep smiling. Hi, Frank. I'm so excited to have you as a guest on this project. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Well, thank you for having me, Liberty.
Well, you're one of the most interesting people I've ever met. I truly mean that. And I cannot believe all the things that you do and have done in your life. You're really something. And then, you know, all these boys that you've managed too, right from when they were little. It's a pretty incredible thing. You're just nothing but energy, aren't you?
Well, you know, I remember listening to Bob Proctor one time. I did an interview with Bob actually for the documentary that I did. And Bob said that you don't get energy, you make energy. And I totally agree with him. I believe that it's kind of like a mindset. I was just speaking to someone this morning from the Philippines, and they were saying, do you ever run out of energy? And I said, well, maybe sometimes, but you know, that's when I'm sleeping. And so I think that you just know that you're capable and just take it from there.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And you know that there's that, I don't know which law of motion it is, but an object in motion stays in motion. Isn't that how it goes? And that's very true. When we just allow ourselves to stop, then yeah, we really do stop. And it's really hard to get going again.
Exactly.
So movie producer, music producer, songwriter, good grief, you've got all these things that you do. Well, good job, you have the mindset of all that energy.
Mindset, but you know, I'm probably one of the few guys in the world that's written a #1 hit and can't remember the lyrics.
Really? Which one is that?
Girl of My Dreams.
Oh yeah, that's a great song. Love that one. My all-time favorite Moffatts tune is "Miss You Like Crazy," and actually that's one of my very favorite songs ever. Not just by the Moffatts, but anyone. I love that song. It's so beautiful.
That song definitely touched a lot of hearts and you know, brought a lot of people into the Moffatt fold, as per se.
I can imagine it did. And people still know that song even now, and that's, 20-ish years ago or thereabouts.
Yeah, I think it's the 20-year anniversary coming up this May.
Wow. That's a long time ago. So you've been a busy boy since they were little. I don't know how you rounded them all up. I mean, you had one child who was 11 months old, and then you had triplets. I can't even imagine.
Well, one of my good buddies at the time said, you know, Frank, I think if I was you, I would have gone out for a loaf of bread and never came back. I think that what people, you know, you look at a situation, and unfortunately what happens in a lot of cases, people look at a situation and they become overwhelmed situation. For me, I just looked at it and took it one step at a time. And, with those little babies at nighttime, it was kind of like an assembly line. And, I've sat here, I actually had all three triplets here last weekend when Bob and Cliff were performing at the Calgary Stampede. And we were talking about parenting, as with every parent, we are the blame of all.
Yep.
Which is okay, because I remember blaming my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And, just to go off of that a little bit, one of my buddies was telling me something the other day. He was sitting there and he said something like, "Yeah, I can't believe kids these days." And I said, "Are you serious? You're going to say that? You're actually going to say that?" Because that's what our parents said about us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what their parents said about them. And I don't think anything's changed. In fact, are you aware that statistically, crime has not changed since the year I was born, percentage-wise, to this year today? And we look at it and we go, "Oh man, crime's up, murder's up, rape's up." Of course the numbers are up. But so are the number of people. But the percentages are bang on right across the board. Nothing's changed. So really, when I look at life as kind of a study. And, we had drama. We want some drama. We want to do whatever we want to do to make some noise or whatever, to get some attention or whatever. But the reality is life's pretty consistent. And so when the boys were little, that's what I became, consistent. I was talking to my wife the other day, and she was talking about she would like to adopt a kid. This is a different wife, by the way. And I said, well, that's great, but the responsibility of having a kid. If the kid gets a cold and you got to give him medicine every 4 hours, if you're giving him medicine at midnight, that means you have to wake up at 4 a.m. And I said, when you don't have a kid, you don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. But when you have a kid, you have to take on the responsibility of being consistent and doing things properly. And that's how I did it. And that's why when the triplets were here last weekend, I was saying to them, well, you can all have your opinions on this whole thing, but I know I was deadly consistent. Whether it was deadly consistent in a positive way or a negative way, I was deadly consistent. And they all got a lot of that. They were like, yeah, that's pretty accurate, And, it's kind of the way it goes with kids. Like, having one baby 11 months old and then getting triplets 11 months later, that can be an overwhelming situation. And I know that it was for their mother. And that's why their mother kept leaving, because not everybody's cut out for that kind of a situation. I don't have any at all animosity towards her for those situations. We're all raised in different households, and we're all raised to handle things in a different way. And that's a big load, for little kids. Because when they're crying, when they're teething, it's not like a little baby crying and you're going to pick up that baby and comfort that baby.
Oh, no, they keep yelling, and then you got 3 or 4 of them doing it all at once.
And you can't pick them all up.
No.
And so, maybe this is why my kids became musical, because I would put them in the car seat and I'd turn on Michael Jackson's Thriller album and I would play it full blast so that it would drown them out. They would get drowned out by the music. They quit crying and fall asleep. Now, somebody go, oh, that's terrible. You did that. Well, you try having 4 babies at the same time.
You just have to survive, right? You have to just do what you got to do to make it work.
And that's why one of the things that's interesting about our world today is that people are so quick to judge. And what they forget is they're actually judging themselves, because if somebody says, oh, that guy's a dishonest person, well, I've never met a person that was 100% honest. Ever. And so, what's the semantics? Well, he stole a car. Well, he stole a fish hook. You're both stealing.
Mm-hmm.
He told a big lie. Well, he told a little lie. Well, they're both lying. And I think the Buddha had it kind of right. It's black and white when it comes to a lot of things, that people want to bring all this gray in there. so that they can appease their situation or, justify their actions and behaviors.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not really the
How was it what were the lowest points, or like when you dealing with all these babies, and like you said, you can't pick them up and you're just doing what you can do, and people are going to judge you for some of that. But what was it like for you in your heart of hearts when, I mean, there had to have been some really challenging moments, even though like you said, you were consistent, you just looked at it and said, well, bite the bullet, I'll do it. You couldn't have just breezed through that without having some really challenging moments. How did you, like, did you ever feel sort of frustrated, like, is this ever going to end? Or what was it like for you at its lowest points?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the earliest, toughest moments, Dave had something wrong with his digestive system, and he was a projectile vomiter, and he was dramatically losing weight, and the doctors were afraid that he wasn't going to make it. And, I was just sitting there looking at him, and I was watching him, and he would throw up as soon as he would eat, and he was just losing weight. He wasn't keeping anything in. And the doctors were putting him on IV and all kinds of stuff, but every time they take him off, he was still dropping weight. And they were like, I don't know what's going to happen here.
And how old was he at this point?
What's that?
How old was he at that point?
Maybe about 2 months.
Oh, so very, very little. Okay.
Yeah. And so I remember one time he was going to projectile vomit, and someone slammed the door, and it startled him. And I watched him suck air in again, and it stayed down. So the next time that he went to projectile vomit, I was feeding him, and when he finished eating, and I could see it coming, I gave him a little slap on the cheek, and he started to cry a little bit, but he raised his voice and sucked in the air, and he didn't projectile vomit. So I fed him continuously for the next 4 or 5 days, and every time I fed him, as soon as he was going to do it, I'd give him a little slap on the cheek, and he'd cry but suck it in, and that changed it. Now, who in the world would ever think to do that? But the doctor said to me, I think you saved your kid's life. Now, in today's world, I think I would be up for criminal charges. I'm not sure. But,
well, possibly. I guess if you were hurting him, yes.
I wasn't hurting him. But, I was starving. But, in the world, we just had a $10 million settlement here in Alberta for mental anguish, I guess, of that one terrorist that was released, and now he's up in Canada and got a $10 million award. So mental anguish can also be justified. Actually, if you're a veteran in Canada and you were severely injured and you're handicapped for the rest of your life, the most you get is $360,000. So I'm thinking that the courts lean that mental anguish might be more. That being said, when the Triplets were here, we talked about that. And I talked to Dave about it. He was like, well, I don't think I remember any of that. And I said, no, but this could be the thing. No, I was just kidding with him. But, so anyway, we all have a pretty good relationship. But, it's interesting how things work out.
I can't imagine, though, when you were in that, watching him being so sick and fearing that he was going to die, that had to be just terrible. And they must have been premature if they were triplets?
Sorry?
Were they premature in birth?
Yeah, they were born at 33 weeks. They were about the size of my hand, actually, when they were first born.
Wow. Tiny.
Tiny little guy. Now I have my first grandson, Lake, and he's a little guy, but he's twice as big as they are.
And he's so cute. He's a beautiful baby.
He's really cool. He hardly cries. When he does cry, he's kind of got this little whimpery thing about him, but he's a pretty sweet little guy.
That's really lovely.
Wait, take a picture.
So did you know that you were having triplets beforehand?
Actually, their mom, I couldn't go in. I was staying with Scott in Farrow. We were living up in Farrow in the Yukon. And so she went into Whitehorse, flew into Whitehorse, and had an ultrasound because the doctor said, it looks like you're pregnant, and it looks like it might be a multiple birth, so I'm going to send you into Whitehorse, and they're going to do an ultrasound on you. So she went into Whitehorse, and she called me up, and she said, Frank, everything's good. We can see all their hands, all their feet. Their hearts are all pumping. And by the way, there's 3. And she heard this thud. I was like, are you all right? And I said, no, my knee just gave out, and I just fell down. And then I said, it was unbelievable. I just fell down. And I was thinking to myself, holy shit, I don't know that I'm ready for this. And I remember being in the hospital and saying to the nurse, when the nurse said, you can take one of the babies home now. And I looked at her and I said, are you sure you couldn't keep him for another couple of weeks?
Mm.
And she looked at me like, and she thought I was joking, but I wasn't, because in my mind, I knew how much work this was going to be. And I wasn't mentally ready at that moment to take home 3 more babies. And man, I knew what 1 was, and I thought, oh my God, how are we going to deal with 4?
And they were so tiny, and they probably, they're so fragile, and you probably, I'm guessing, you would have been sort of extra fearful that, what if something goes wrong, because they've been in probably a NICU or something, right? On hooked up to all sorts of things that let you know when their hearts are doing what, you know what I mean? So that now you're going to have them at home, and oh dear, what if something happens? I would imagine that had to be kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it was really intense. And I think that's one of the reasons why their mom and our relationship, the boys were saying, well, how was your relationship with mom before we were born? And I said, great. We were best friends. And after, really tough. It's really, really challenging. And I think a lot of people, the one reason why I ended up writing a book, the parenting book, The Perfect Pocketbook for Positive Practical Parenting, the reason why I wrote that book was because there are no books out there for parenting. Yes, there's parenting books for if you have a child with ADD, or if you have a child with this or this or this or this. But there's no books out there that tell you how to raise a child. And so I wrote this book, and I wrote it with specific reasons. The specific reason was to teach parents how to raise their children based on principles. Because, unfortunately, what I bring into the equation as a parent is my mom and dad's parenting skills that they taught me through osmosis. And how good were those skills? Well, I'm sure some were good, and I'm sure some weren't. And so we as parents, it never ceases to amaze me, the stuff they teach us in school, when really they should be teaching us a lot of things that are really valuable and important in school. Like, every child should learn how to meditate. They don't teach that.
Oh,
every
you're
child
right.
should learn, the principles of life. Nobody teaches that. They teach us things like 2 + 2. Well,
Yeah, they're not teaching about, they should be teaching things like self-esteem. Sorry to interrupt you, but like self-esteem, self-respect, things like that can really help children grow in a way that makes them more, happy and have more productive lives where they feel good about themselves, because there's certainly none of that being taught in school.
No, and that's the stuff that helps us live, effective, sociable lives. Mm-hmm. But, the more you dig deeper into the understanding of the way the system is built and structured, they don't really want us to learn that, because the more functional and the more respectful we are to each other, the less need there is to expand governments so that there's always a protective system in place for the top 5% should things go south. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, it really is. But I understand what you're saying, that, and there are a lot of children, and you were one, I was one, most of us are not growing up in, certainly from our generation, they're not growing up in homes where you're encouraged and supported emotionally. Most of us came from some kind of dysfunctional, toxic upbringing, but our parents did their best because they were coming out of, Victorian era or early 1900s where it was a product of that, and even worse from before that. So they can only teach what they already learned or what they knew, and we didn't grow up with things like Dr. Phil and self-help books and, counseling and all that sort of thing that's available now. So there are still a lot of children being brought up in homes where there's a lot of abuse and toxicity. Not everyone, and I think that's improving, but I think you're right. If it's taught in the schools, that doesn't mean kids are going to necessarily absorb it immediately if that's not what they're seeing at home, but at least it gives them something to think about. It gives them a way to, kind of look at it a different way. You know what I mean? Like some food for thought, like, oh, maybe there is another way. Maybe my parents aren't right in telling me these terrible things about myself. Might not happen at the moment, but it could happen down the road, if that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, when my kids were born, I remember saying to my wife, look at a few of my buddies. You can see the buddies of mine that were raised in a household that taught them morals and values. And you can see a household that they were raised when they weren't. And here's what happens. Every kid goes out. We all go out. We all take off, and we all spread our wings. And, we get into shit. We get into trouble. We get into all kinds of stuff. And then if we've had good upbringing, we know where to come back to. But if we don't, we stay out there and we stay lost. And you can see these people walking around 40s, 50s, 60s. They're completely lost in life. Their lives are upside down, whatever. Those are the ones that really didn't have a good home base and a good structure to come back to. As you say, I think every parent does their best job, but I don't think there are many parents out there that really understand that if we teach our children based upon principles, and principles are rock solid, if we teach them based on principles, we are giving our children a really good structure on how to handle any situation that happens later on in life. If you look back when we were kids, back in the early 50s, situations, if you look at the housewife, a good housewife back in the day, that good housewife is here in North America, the exact same housewife that is happening right now today in Saudi and in Iran and in all of these places. So I'm not as terrified about the outcome of these situations that a lot of people are, because evolution moves people forward. And that will happen in the other countries too. The only thing that, the only fears there are is that people don't get access to the information to allow them to evolve. But that's happening, it's continually happening. So the world isn't in as bad a place as a lot of people want to say it is. There's always the Chicken Littles running around saying the sky is falling.
Yeah, I agree with you. Excuse me. I totally agree that I think it's in better shape than people want to say it is.
It is. I mean, even, you go to Indonesia, okay, it's taking a little bit of a slide back right now, but that's because, the extremist guys are pushing and pushing. But that will take even a bigger swing to the positive again the next generation. And, we like to look at things in our time because, that's the most important time. But really the world's evolving, and you can't stop that. I mean, that's the way it is. But we can't always look at things like right in front of our eye. I remember when George Bush attacked Iraq. I met George Bush over in Thailand, and, I didn't want to meet the guy because I thought, what a jerk. I mean, this guy going attacking Iraq and his all BS and everything like that. Well, when I met the guy, I met him at a hospice, and he was the most loving, caring guy. Unbelievable. He was so kind and so loving to these HIV patients. They had open source. He was holding their hands. He was spectacular. Now, since then, I've said to myself, well, maybe I shouldn't look at George Bush so harshly. Maybe what he did through the course of time, 200 years from now, will have been a great move to start to liberate those areas of the world. I mean, I don't know. It's going to history will tell. I mean, in my time, maybe nothing. And so I could judge everything based on my time and say what a stupid stupid idea. But maybe 300 years down the road, people will look back at that time and go, wow, that's when the Middle East started to become liberated. And who knows, you know?
Yeah.
We have too much tendency to look right at today's little dot rather than, that's kind of a Buddhist mentality kind of thing, to look at things a little bit bigger picture and give a little bit more grace. But I think that, like you just said, the world's not a bad place.
It's not. And one of the things that there's one thing that does bring people together, or one thing that everyone relates to, and that's music. And that's been such a huge part of your life and your son's lives. And, that's one way that you're sort of giving to the world in a really cool and loving way. And I think it's really interesting how that kind of started. I know the story about their mother was rehearsing for something, and Dave picked up the microphone and started singing. And he was about 3 at the time, I think, yeah? And you said, well, who's that? And one of them said, that's Dave. And, well, you can tell the rest of that story, but, like, who'd have ever thought when you're in the throes of listening to these screaming babies and they're teething and you're having to crank music just so you can get them to be quiet. I had to do that a time or two with mine as well. Sometimes there's just nothing else to do, but they do fall asleep. I can imagine that in those scary moments when Dave's projectile vomiting and looking like he might not survive, and the rest of them are all yelling, teething, whatever's going on, you could never in your wildest imaginings have thought that they were going to end up becoming internationally known for their music.
There's another thing too. I remember when they were little, thinking to myself, "Oh my God, how will I ever get through this? Like how?" I figured out how much it was going to cost to get my kids all the way up until they were 18 and out of the house, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, I don't know how am I ever going to do this." But today, the triplets are 33 and Scott's 34, and it worked. Now, I don't know how it worked, but I do know that pretty much everybody I've ever met, it works. And, I was telling my wife the other day, she was all stressed out or something, and I said, why don't you just let it go? Because we all get wrapped up in stuff. But I'm telling you, in the end, it worked. It always works out.
Yeah, it does. It works, and it doesn't always work out the way we expect, and sometimes some tragic, awful things happen along the way, but you can't sort of worry about all that when you're in the middle of it. But
those tragic things are part of it's working out.
So you're managing all 4 of them from when they were little. I mean, you went from just being the parent of these 4 little boys who are 3 of them are 3 years old, and 1 is 4, and all of a sudden now they're musicians, they're singers, well, I guess they weren't musicians quite yet, but they were certainly singing. And that certainly erupted into something over the years that you could not have foreseen. And I'm sure that had its challenges. As exciting and wonderful as it was, there had to have been a lot of challenges in that as well.
Yeah, the music business is not an easy business. People aren't overly honest in it. But I think, it gave the boys a skill. I think that, you as a parent, you observe your children, and if you follow where they're kind of leading, where they want to go, and my boys enjoyed music and seemed to enjoy it, and you let them carry on with it, and next thing you know, 33 years later, 2 of them are playing at the Calgary Stampede, and, the other one's just getting an album ready to go, and it's, they're still doing what they did.
Mm-hmm. And there's an upcoming Moffatts album, and actually I've just recorded one with one of them too. Not an album, but a song, and there's talk of more music, so that one's in the works, but kind of loving what we've been creating so far. And yeah, they're all still in music, but this upcoming Moffatts album, it's the first one in 16 years or something, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll been one for a while. It's going to be interesting for them now because, they're all adults, and you're looking at 3 different styles of music, basically, that they've learned to embrace. Mm-hmm. And so now, look at that, it's kind of going to be interesting to see the dynamics, how well they work together at providing one sound. And, let's see how they can do that.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it. I know it's going to be a few months to get it written and recorded, but I'll certainly be at the front of the queue to get that album. They're so talented, too. Like, that's another thing that kind of blows me away about these four young men. In a family, you have four children, they're not necessarily all going to be that talented. You may get one or two, but they're all so gifted musically. It's just amazing.
Well, I've always said that talent is hard work plus determination plus dedication plus diligence. And you put all that together, and you keep working, and you keep working, and you keep working, and next thing you know, talent.
Well, to an extent, that's true. However, I mean, I've worked with people, for example, when I would be teaching piano. There are some people who are just tone deaf. They cannot hear that they've made a mistake. They don't understand a chord. They can't hear it. They really can't hear it. Or you see it all the time on those singing audition type shows, X Factor and The Voice and all of those sort of things. And people who really swear they can sing and they're so tone deaf, they just don't have that natural something. You have to start with that.
No, I get that. But I still think that that's not their talent. But everybody's talented, I believe. Everybody's equally talented on this planet.
Yeah.
Maybe in different avenues. But music, I think, if you look at Beethoven and those kind of guys, when they talked about their music, they said, yeah, we practiced about 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And Pavarotti, when I talked to him, he was telling me, if I go a day without singing, it's like I haven't sang for a week. And if I go 2 days without singing, it's like I haven't sang for a month. And if I go 3 days without singing, it's like I'm starting all over again. And, the interesting thing is that no matter what you want to do in your life, you can become very good at it if you stick at it and you continually work hard. And I can give you an example of that because I heard the Backstreet Boys when they first started singing, and I'm just going to be straight up honest, they're horrible. There wasn't a guy that could sing in that group. And today, go to Las Vegas, listen to them sing a cappella. Every last one of them can nail it. So I think that if you put the time and effort into something, you'll get it. But you have to have a willingness and a desire to become great. And you have to have a willingness and a desire to make some changes as you're going along the path. Because maybe the path you're on isn't going to be the path you need to be on.
That's true. And I would imagine with your four boys, when they were little, it must have been like trying to herd cats sometimes to get them to do what they needed to do. But, to do their singing, to do the performing, whatever, when they were really little. But they did become ridiculously successful, and that's continued. They still have quite a following, and I think it's growing. And I'm sure that their various upcoming ventures are going to just take them from strength to strength with that. What's next for you these days?
I have a few things on the go right now. Actually, I have a few speaking engagements in the U.S. coming up right away on 2nd 50, and then I'm working on a kids TV show where a little boy goes into a zoo and the animals are all sad because they can't communicate to each other, and so the little boy teaches these animals how to speak English, and then they all learn to speak English. And as they learn to speak English, the children watching the TV show will also learn how to speak English. So I'm working on that project. And then I have a little project with Bob and Clint that we'll see where that goes. That's also another little kids project. So a lot of kids projects, to be honest with you.
Is that because you're really just a big kid yourself? Speaking from my personal experience with you, you have such a beautiful, playful spirit that it's really fun.
Yeah, well, it's life's pretty dang short. Every day I look in the mirror, I can see that. And so I'm thinking, you got to give it what you can.
And that's what led you to your second 50, the book, the film, that whole movement that you're creating around living a better second 50 than the first 50. You want to give me a little bit about an update on that? What's happening with that these days? I know you've got the book. Well, the documentary is brilliant.
Well, what's interesting about that is when I did the book, I wrote it, first time I wrote it was in 2006, and I wrote it when I was in Southeast Asia. It became a bestseller over there. We had it released in a bunch of different languages. And I wrote about the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual dimensions. And then when I came back here and I was living with my parents and taking care of my mom and dad when they were aging and getting older and whatever, I added another dimension, the financial dimension. Because here in the West, I could see that it was such a huge problem. People were terrified they wouldn't have the finances to live out the remainder of their life. And then, when I finished all of that, I realized that, you can actually have a really strong mind. You can have good control of your emotions. You can be physically fit. You can be financially stable. And you can be spiritually connected to a higher power. But if you don't have a purpose, life's not very exciting.
Yeah.
And so that's when God willing, that's when John Orion came into my life, and that's when we whipped up this play of creation. And play of creation is kind of an interesting process where people can actually learn to align their inner core self desires with a venture that'll keep them excited and moving forward throughout the second half of their 50s. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're kind of like helping people figure out their purpose and turn it into a venture that's very positive in their life.
That's fantastic. You got your hand in a whole bunch of really interesting pots, and it's always fun to hear what you're up to. Are there any final sort of thoughts or tips or hints that you would give anyone who's maybe coping with parenting challenges, whether with one baby or a whole bunch like you were? Anything that you could say that might help them to kind of hold on and get through?
Well, I heard a good saying a long time ago, and it was, "This too will change." And I think what we need to understand is that nothing in life is stagnant. And so if you think it's really great right now, just know that it's going to be really not great. And the best place, as the Buddha would say, to be in life is never too high and never too low. Try to stay in the middle where it's good. Don't look for great. Don't look for amazing. Don't look for incredible. Because when you go to the high end of the scale, you drop down to the low end of the scale. Try to find that nice place right in the middle where everything's good. And then life is actually pretty good. And if you are ever struggling in your life and you're really feeling down and depressed, get out of your head and go help someone else, and you'll get a reprieve while you're helping someone else.
That's really good advice, and I so agree with that. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own miseries that it's easy to forget that, you just need a bit of perspective on it. It doesn't mean that you're not having a hard time, but when you go look at somebody else's worst time, then, gee, maybe it's not that bad for me after all. It can really make a difference.
Or you can go jump into somebody else's good time and enjoy it with them, and then you forget about it too.
Yeah, there is that as well. You live what you just said about the being good. We've been, having these conversations for quite some time where I ask how you are, and then I usually just write after that, I know, good. There's no point even asking, because no matter how wonderful it is or how awful it is, you'll always say, oh, good. Well, thanks so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing your story today and for some of your thoughts. I really appreciate it, and I know that you will have said some things that really help a lot of people, so thank you for that.
And thank you for having me on it.
And where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Calgary? I'm just kidding. Just walk downtown and, or walk along the river. I'm walking along the river every day. So I think, www.yoursecond50.com is probably the website where I'm hanging out the most. Or you can go to my Facebook, Frank Moffatt Author.
Okay.
And there you can send me a message. And or you can go to my personal page and send me a message. Since 2006, I've replied to them all, so
excellent.
You wouldn't be back.
Well done. Well, thanks very much, Frank, and I hope you have a good day.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Conversations of Hope with Liberty Forrest. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the newest editions. If you'd like to contact Liberty, you can write her at info@yourstoryofhope.com. And remember, when you choose hope, you can get through anything.